Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. It seems like only 2 weeks ago that I was sitting by a pool on a sun lounger in the tropical island paradise that is Bali. That's because it was only 2 weeks ago that I was doing exactly that. Actually, it feels like forever ago. That's the problem with holidays. You have a great time, you come back, you get into the humdrum and the routine of daily life again, and you forget all about it. Woe is me, at least I got a holiday in the first place. Anyway, you may remember I took a selection of 4 watches on my travels with me. You may have watched the little What's in the Watch Roll video that I made a couple of weeks ago. 4 pieces that I felt deserve an extended trial, a bit of extra wrist time, stuff that I was really interested to see how they performed, especially in tropical climes. One of which was the Oris Aquis Great Barrier Reef 3 Special Edition. Now, big shout out to Oris Australia. This one is currently on loan from them. They were kind enough to let me take it overseas, and I've asked for a little bit of extra wrist time. I've asked to borrow this one for another month or so. I'm planning the next installment of Lume Wars episode 3, and I really want to feature this Oris. As you'll see from the Lume video coming up, the Lume on these Aquis is fantastic, and I must say I was really impressed with this GBRIII on my travels. It really was the main watch that I used. I didn't want to take it off. It's one of these watches that's hard to photograph, but the dial has got that little bit of magic about it. When you catch it at the right light, at the right angle, I think they got it just about perfect. Let's flip the camera and see if my videography can do it justice. Indeed, can my DSLR do justice to the GBRIII then? It should be pointed out that this is not the standard packaging. As I said, this watch is on loan from Oris Australia. They sent it to me with a couple of spare links in one of these little travel pouches. This is a limited edition. As such, it has a price tag to match. There are only 2,000 of these. I'm sure they come in a big luxury fancy box to justify the $2,500 US price tag. So let's be clear from the beginning, this is a little more expensive than the stuff I normally review on the channel. I guess therefore there are kind of 2 reviews in one today. Obviously the GBRIII at $2,500 is the watch I have in front of me. That's the one that you're going to see. But you can pick up the standard base model, if you will, Oris Aquis for about half of that on the grey market. And a lot of what I say here about the way that this watch is constructed, the way that it wears, etc., is as applicable to the base model as it is to this limited edition model, if you see what I mean. But you only get that dial on the Great Barrier Reef limited edition, and that is undoubtedly one of the prettiest dials I've had the pleasure of staring at long term this year and probably over the last 3 years. Initially you think, oh, there's a lot going on there. There's a small second indicator over at 9 o'clock. There's an exposed date wheel in some ways, 1 to 31 all the way around there with a tiny little yellow indicator. We've got a kind of turquoise sunburst in the middle, darker on the outside, yellow accents. But it just hangs it all together absolutely beautifully, I think. I've got plenty of macro for you. I'm going to throw in some macro at various points here today. And I think that under macro, you begin to see some of the little details that perhaps you're not going to see otherwise, and begin to see how the whole thing comes together as a cohesive unit. It's really effective. And it's a big watch. It's bigger than I would normally go for. 43.5mm in diameter. 12.5mm thick though, so it's not particularly thick on wrist. Integrated bracelet, but the effective lug tip to lug tip of 49.5. What are we thinking there? It's kind of 24-ish at the lugs where it meets the case of the watch. Tapers down to about 18, back up to 20 at the clasp. So there is a chunky head on here, but it does taper down nicely on the bracelet. Sized up for me, 7-inch wrist. I've got this one just about right, 3 micro adjusts, and I'm in the middle. This one weighs in at 172 grams. So again, it's bigger than I would normally wear, and it's heavier than I would normally wear, but it never felt like a particularly big or heavy watch, I think. Dimensionally, proportionally, it wears great. I need to get my hands on one of the small ones, one of the little 39.5mm Oris Aquis over the course of 2020. So 316L stainless steel case, crown, bezel and full integrated stainless steel bracelet. Obviously no end links to speak of. We have screw links, we have a Double security push-up, milled clasp with those 3 levels of micro adjust, but there's no on-the-fly adjustment. There is, however, a diver's extension. I wasn't that brave on my holidays. I didn't don a wetsuit because I can't really swim, but if you're that way inclined, then at least you have that option there. Case finishing is a mixture of brushed and polished. Now, I reviewed the Aquis GMT and I observed that the bracelet is kind of the opposite way around. So rather than having polished mid links, we've got polished outer links. There's quite a lot of polish therefore on the visible surfaces. Plenty of brush on the side and so on, but when you're looking at the watch top down, if you're looking at it as it would be on your wrist, there's quite a lot of high polish there. High polish around to that bezel, and obviously it's a ceramic bezel. Plenty of silver surfaces to catch and play with the light. Bezel action is very good indeed. 120 click unidirectional, rotating dive time. Rock solid, no backplay, no bounce. Nice and crisp action on there as well. But let's focus on the dial because let's face it, that is the reason that you're going to go for one of these GBRIII limited editions rather than the base model. So quite a pronounced sunburst effect on the inner ring there. Turquoise depending on how you catch the light. The date wheel is also in a paler shade of blue, and then we've got a fade, a kind of briny green almost, heading out towards a dark blue, almost a black by the time you get to the minute track around the outer edge. The ceramic bezel takes that back up to a mid to deep blue, and you've also got that yellow, just a little touch of yellow, the triangle at 12, and the date indicator also being in a yellow colour. I'll also slip in a couple of photos. I tried to get this one at its best in the right light condition. I don't think I quite managed to get it. I don't think I quite managed to do it justice, but that's my best attempt. Really, you need to see one of these in the flesh, I think, to get a handle on the dial. An extended applied baton at 12, standard size batons everywhere else. Now, there is a bit of asymmetry because of the small second indicator at the 9 o'clock, but you do lose the asymmetry that you would get with a cut out date wheel either at 3 or 6. I like that little small seconds indicator. The watch seems to have a slightly more relaxed attitude towards time as a consequence, if you see what I mean. If you've ever run a watch with a small second, it does give the watch a less pronounced movement, a sort of sense of moving with a degree of stillness, if that's not a complete paradox. Oris logo just printed above the pinion in white, Aquis 30 bar 300 meters. Above the index at 6 and obviously Swiss made. Oris, a Swiss company since the 1920s, all of their watches manufactured in Switzerland. Popping a link to show you the case back and just confirming that Oris are a Swiss brand there. The usual spec sheet, sapphire crystal, stainless steel, 300 meters, and the limited edition, this one being number 648 out of 2000. I must say though, it does look like they spent most of their time and effort designing the dial and then thought, what do we do about the case back? It's an Australian special edition, it's Great Barrier Reef. Let's put the Southern Cross and a bit of coral and I'll go to the pub. Now the movement behind that less than spectacular case back is the Oris Caliber 743, essentially a Sellita SW200 based movement with a dirty great red signature Oris rotor slapped onto the back of it. 26 jewel hacking and hand winding, high beat 4 Hz auto, so 28,800 vibrations per hour. Healthy amplitude, minimal beat error in this one. Plus 10-11 seconds a day. I normally find these Sellita 200 based movements in the back of the various Oris that I have owned over the last couple of years come in just about under 10. This one running slightly fast, but you aren't getting a particularly spectacular movement for your $2,500. As I said, this one really is about the limited availability and that super pretty dial. But if you're a Lume pig like me, the quality of the Lume on this Aquis is also definitely part of the appeal. This is the second one I've had. The GMT did very well in Lume Wars 2. It won Lume Wars 2. This is a full 20-minute exposure. That's as long as my camera will take in a single take, compressed down to about 45 seconds. I think that's the equivalent of about 6 or 7 hours in the real world. And as you can see, even towards the end of the footage here, the Aquis is still hanging on in very impressively. BGW9, plenty of it on the hands, the indices, and even on the top tip of that little small second hand as well. And it wears very well indeed. I always thought that the smaller of the two Aquis would be the one I would go for, but as soon as I first tried this one on, I knew the larger size suited my 7-inch wrist just fine. I should have mentioned the double domed sapphire crystal. Nice curve there, gently sloping into the ceramic bezel insert. No protrusion of the case back, the integrated lugs,
The recessed mid-link of the bracelet, the integrated bracelet, means it conforms to the wrist very, very well. As I said, slightly above average weight at 170 grams, but it carries it remarkably well for a big chunky watch. And that's the proper overhead shot. 43.5 in today's market is a reasonably sized watch. I think we've seen the kind of peak early 2000s big watch phase fading, and we're now heading towards smaller watches, hence the introduction of the slightly smaller Aquis a couple of years ago. But like I said, no problems with this one. You know, a big watch that looks like a big watch that doesn't wear like a big watch is actually something of an advantage. And there we are outside in some natural light. Again, you can see those different colour tones at work on the dial, from pale turquoise blue to darker briny greens and the little hints of yellow. Just enough of a colour mix to keep it interesting. Plenty of spare links included with this one. I reckon if you're a bigger guy with 8-inch plus wrist, one of these Aquis is going to suit you very well indeed. But even if you've got a smaller wrist than mine, don't be frightened of giving the 43.5 a try. Okay, this has all been fairly gushing and effusive so far. I really enjoyed my time with the Great Barrier Reef 3. Certainly my holiday memories will be fused with this watch, but nothing's perfect. What are my moans and niggles? Well, 2.5 grand. At least a grand more than the regular one. I would be thinking long and hard before I dropped a grand on a limited edition. Really, whether that dial justifies the extra increase in price given the movement doesn't get an upgrade, the bracelet doesn't get an upgrade, it's essentially the same watch that you can pick up for $1,000 less. As such, $2,500 is a fair chunk of money for a unregulated base model-ish Sellita movement in the back of the watch. That's a common complaint about Oris using off-the-shelf movements. Perhaps they're going to do something about that for the Aquis range next year, who knows? I talked about it when I reviewed the GMT. The clasp is okay, it's nicely machined, it's sturdy enough, but it doesn't have any on-the-fly adjustment. I reviewed the Christopher Ward Trident Pro for well under $1,000, that it had its own proprietary system internally adjusting. I would love to see Oris doing something like that next year as well. It would make a comfortable wearing watch even more comfortable long term. And the fact that the bracelet is integrated is going to put a number of people off, I'm sure. You can put this one on a rubber, but you're going to be buying that rubber from Oris. Likewise, you can put it on a leather, but you're going to be buying the leather from Oris. A lot of people prefer the flexibility that you get from a standard lug width, standard bracelet. You can swap it out to your heart's content. And that dial, potentially a bit of a double-edged sword. As I lay on my sun lounger, sipping a coconut, looking at that beautiful arrangement, I thought, how would this look on a wet Wednesday afternoon in Bognor Regis? Insert wherever you like that isn't quite as tropical as Bali into that particular sentence. You see what I mean, I'm sure. Gorgeous colour tones, but not necessarily therefore an everyday office watch for those grey, dull, overcast Wednesday morning meetings. But if you're prepared to spend the money, it really is a honey, this one. I have enjoyed it enormously. Big shout out to Oris Australia again for giving me a loan of this one. I really need to get the base model in for review, and perhaps one of the small ones as well, early in the new year. So there you have it, the Oris Aquis Great Barrier Reef 3, my second bite at the Aquis cherry, and I must say it is a very, very impressive watch. 43.5mm does sound quite imposing, and if I'm being truthful, I would love it to be just a touch smaller, but don't be put off by the size. It wears very, very well indeed for a bigger and heavier dive style watch. And I must say I was thoroughly enamoured with this one on my travels. Like I said, all those kind of tropical dial colours, the rich briny greens and blues, looked fab on my holidays, but might not look quite so fab in your office on a wet Wednesday, but that's up to you, not up to me. As always with Oris, the price is getting up there, but you'd be crazy not to ask your Oris dealer for a bit of a discount on this one. Big thank you again to Oris Australia for letting me have an extended play with their watch. You'll see this one again in a couple of future videos, I'm sure. Thanks for watching. See you soon.